When American psychologists sat across from the captured leaders of the Third Reich at Nuremberg, they sought to understand not only what these men had done, but what kind of minds could have done it. Each man was tested, not for loyalty or ideology, but for intellect. The results shocked even their examiners. Many of these architects of the Nazi regime, men responsible for mass murder and global war, scored astonishingly high, some at near genius levels. How could such intelligence coexist with such evil? And among them all, who was the smartest Nazi? Let's start with the most notorious of them all. Adolf Hitler, the dictator who dragged Europe into ruin, never took the IQ test. But historians have long debated the power of his mind. Hitler possessed a magnetic intuition, the ability to manipulate emotion, to sense the pulse of a crowd, and to convert resentment into power. He could recall minute details, military figures, and speeches with uncanny precision. But his intellect was emotional, not analytical, rooted in instinct rather than reason. He misunderstood strategy, dismissed opposing voices, and grew increasingly detached from reality as the war turned against him. His brilliance lay in manipulation, a cunning built on emotion, ego, and theatrical instinct. Yet that same brilliance devoured itself, collapsing under the weight of his delusion and destroying the very empire it created. Julius Streicher, the publisher of Der Stürmer, occupied the other extreme. With an IQ of 106, he was the least intelligent of the Nazi leaders tested. Yet his venomous propaganda became one of the Reich's most lethal psychological weapons. Streicher filled his paper with grotesque caricatures and lies about Jews, normalizing hatred across Germany. At Nuremberg, he ranted unrepentantly, taking pride in his work. Psychologists described him as childish, narcissistic, and sexually perverse, proof that hatred requires no genius, only obsession. His low intellect did not make him harmless, it made him primitive, a man who mistook brutality for strength. Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy and one-time confidant, scored 120. Once a passionate ideologue, Hess grew increasingly unstable. In May 1941, convinced that he could end the war, he flew solo to Scotland in a desperate bid to negotiate peace. He was arrested and spent the rest of the conflict imprisoned. His mind, though sharp, had fractured under pressure. At Nuremberg, Hess appeared confused, paranoid, and forgetful. The psychologist saw flashes of intelligence beneath layers of delusion. His flight to Scotland symbolized the disintegration of reason within a man who once stood at Hitler's right hand. Alfred Rosenberg, the chief philosopher of the Nazi movement, recorded a score of 127. He tried to transform racism into ideology, to give Nazism an intellectual and spiritual framework. As the author of The Myth of the 20th Century, Rosenberg built a pseudo-philosophical justification for German supremacy and anti-Semitism. Later, as Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories, he oversaw the mass murder and cultural destruction on an industrial scale. His intelligence was real, methodical, articulate, and cold, but it served delusion, not truth. Rosenberg stands as the archetype of the intellectual who uses reason to rationalize atrocity. Joachim von Ribbentrop, Hitler's foreign minister, also scored 129. Once a wine merchant, he reinvented himself as a suave diplomat and became one of Hitler's most loyal subordinates. He negotiated the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Stalin, dividing Eastern Europe between Germany and the Soviet Union. On paper, he was articulate, persuasive, and calculating. In practice, he was slavishly devoted to Hitler's vision and incapable of independent judgment. Psychologists at Nuremberg found him intelligent but rigid, a man whose cleverness masked moral emptiness. Wilhelm Keitel, head of the High Command of the German Armed Forces, shared that same IQ of 129. As one of Hitler's top military officials, Keitel signed orders that led to the execution of civilians, prisoners, and resistance fighters. His subordinates mockingly called him Laketel, or the lackey. Despite his intellect and strategic understanding, he chose obedience over conscience. The psychologist Gustav Gilbert called him a loyal officer without a moral core. Keitel's mind was not weak, it was willfully submissive, the intelligence of a man who preferred following evil to resisting it. Baldur von Schirach, the cultured leader of the Hitler Youth and later governor of Vienna, scored 130. Educated, articulate, and fascinated by literature, he saw himself as a teacher, guiding German youth toward greatness. Under his rule, Vienna's Jewish population was systematically deported to death camps. At Nuremberg, von Schirach spoke of remorse, calling the Holocaust the greatest crime in history. Yet his words could not erase his past. His intelligence had been used to indoctrinate a generation. His mind, refined and literary, was a reminder that culture without conscience is no protection against barbarism. Franz von Papen, the aristocratic diplomat who opened the door for Hitler's rise, tested at 134. A former chancellor, von Papen believed he could harness Hitler's popularity for conservative ends. He famously boasted, "We've hired him." But it was Hitler who used von Papen, not the other way around. His intelligence was sharp but blinded by arrogance. After 1933, his influence evaporated. Acquitted at Nuremberg, von Papen returned to private life, remembered not as a mastermind but as the man whose cleverness unleashed a monster. Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe and Hitler's designated successor, possessed one of the most complex and brilliant minds at Nuremberg. His IQ of 138 placed him among the top tier of the Nazi hierarchy. Göring was a World War I ace pilot, decorated war hero, and early supporter of Hitler. He helped orchestrate the Nazi seizure of power, created the Gestapo, and oversaw Germany's rearmament. He combined charisma with cunning, able to charm judges and interrogators even as he faced the gallows. In court, Göring dominated the room. Psychologists described him as manipulative, magnetic, and psychologically astute, capable of controlling conversations, reading emotions, and exploiting weakness. His intelligence was strategic and theatrical, the mind of a consummate actor who never stopped performing. But it was also deeply corrupt. Göring's intellect was devoted to preserving power and privilege, even as millions died under his regime. His brilliance, like Hitler's, was poisoned by ego. Arthur Seyss-Inquart, the Austrian lawyer and Reich Commissioner for the Netherlands, recorded an IQ of 141. His demeanor was calm, educated, and bureaucratic, yet his orders sent more than 100,000 Dutch Jews to their deaths. Seyss-Inquart represented the terrifying face of administrative evil, the educated technocrat who saw genocide as paperwork. Polite, meticulous, and articulate, he justified every atrocity through legal language and cold efficiency. His high IQ enabled him to rationalize murder with perfect composure. Intelligence, in his hands, became a scalpel, precise, bloodless, and lethal. And then there was Hjalmar Schacht, economist, banker, and technocrat, the man who topped the charts. His IQ, 143, was the highest recorded among all defendants. Schacht was once celebrated as Germany's financial savior. As president of the Reichsbank, he stabilized the Weimar economy after hyperinflation. Later, as Hitler's Minister of Economics, he rebuilt German industry, financed rearmament, and gave the Third Reich its economic engine. Yet Schacht was not a true Nazi believer. When Hitler's war ambitions grew reckless, he distanced himself, but not before laying the groundwork for the regime's power. In 1944, he was imprisoned for suspected ties to the resistance. At Nuremberg, he argued that he had only served Germany, not Nazism, and was ultimately acquitted. Schacht embodied the ultimate paradox: immense intelligence without moral clarity. He saw himself as apolitical, as if intellect existed apart from responsibility. In truth, his brilliance had helped build the foundation of tyranny. When American psychologists analyzed the results, they were stunned. The average IQ of the Nazi leadership was 128, nearly 2 standard deviations above the general population. These men were not ignorant fanatics. They were capable, disciplined, and often brilliant. Gustav Gilbert, who spent months interviewing them, concluded that their intelligence only made them more dangerous. Evil, he wrote in his Nuremberg diary, is the absence of empathy. High intellect gave them efficiency, but empathy gave them none. Rosenberg used his intelligence to invent racial theory. Ribbentrop used his to justify war. Keitel used his to obey. Göring used his to command. Schacht used his to enable. Even the unmeasured mind of Hitler weaponized charisma as a form of intellect. The Nuremberg IQ tests revealed a chilling truth. Intelligence alone is not virtue. It is simply capacity, the power to act, whether for creation or destruction. In these men, intellect did not illuminate conscience. It served ambition. They remind us that brilliance, when severed from morality, becomes a force of ruin. The smartest Nazi was not the one who learned the most, but the one who reasoned best without remorse. When the psychologists at Nuremberg closed their notebooks, they were left not with answers, but with unease. Intelligence had not prevented atrocity. It had enabled it. The smartest Nazi, Hjalmar Schacht, may have been a man of economics rather than bloodshed, yet his intellect helped forge the engine that made the Holocaust possible. The lesson was clear. Intelligence without conscience is the most dangerous weapon of all. So the real question isn't who was the smartest Nazi, but what happens when intellect serves ideology instead of humanity. If you found this exploration insightful, please like the video, subscribe, and ring the notification bell for more deep dives into the psychology of World War II. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.